I locked my husband and his mistress in our storage room and called her husband to come see what I found. I know how that sounds. Crazy, right? Like something out of a bad movie. But I swear on everything I have, it happened exactly like that. And honestly, it was the smartest thing I've ever done in my 32 years of breathing. Let me back up a little. My name is Piper, and until that Thursday afternoon, I thought I had it all figured out. 10 years with Garrett, a successful orthopedic surgeon in Seattle. We had the kind of life people envied from the outside. The beautiful house in Queen Anne with the view of the Sound. My art gallery downtown that actually turned a profit. Annual trips to Europe where we'd post photos that got hundreds of likes. We looked perfect. We looked happy. But perfection is just a mask, isn't it? And masks crack. For 6 months before that day, I'd been dying slowly without understanding why. Garrett would come home late, smelling like hospital antiseptic, but also something else I couldn't quite place. His phone suddenly had a password I didn't know. When I'd reach for him in bed, he'd pull away, mumbling about exhaustion and long surgeries. And every single time I questioned it, he made me feel insane. He had this way of looking at me like I was being ridiculous, paranoid, needy. I started doubting my own gut, my own sanity. Until I heard her laugh coming from our storage room. This story is long, and it gets darker before it gets better. If you want to know how a single locked door unraveled an entire web of lies, and how I took back everything they tried to steal from me, then stick with me through this. You can follow along here to make sure you don't miss what happens next. Because what I found in that room was just the beginning. The thing about betrayal is that your body knows before your brain catches up. That Thursday started like any other. Garrett kissed my forehead at 7 in the morning, told me he had back-to-back surgeries and wouldn't be home until late. I remember watching him walk to his car, briefcase in hand, looking every bit the dedicated doctor. I even felt guilty for all those paranoid thoughts I'd been having. I spent the morning at the gallery, working with a new artist on her installation. Around 2, my phone rang. It was Monica, Garrett's office manager. She sounded apologetic, almost embarrassed. She told me Garrett had forgotten some important documents at home and really needed them for a consultation in an hour. Could I possibly grab them from his home office and bring them by? Of course I could. I was the supportive wife, after all. I drove back to our house, that knot of anxiety I'd been carrying for months sitting heavy in my chest. I climbed the stairs to Garrett's office, searching through the papers on his desk. Insurance forms, patient files, nothing that seemed urgent. I was about to call Monica back when I heard it. A laugh, light, feminine, coming from somewhere in the house. My heart stopped. We didn't have anyone scheduled to come by. No cleaners, no contractors, no friends who had keys. I stood completely still, barely breathing, listening. There it was again. That same laugh, muffled but unmistakable. Coming from the storage room downstairs. I took off my heels. I don't even remember making that decision, but suddenly I was moving down the stairs in my bare feet, silent as a ghost. The house felt different now, like the walls themselves were holding secrets. I could hear my pulse hammering in my ears with each step. Another sound. Garrett's voice this time, low and intimate in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in months. Maybe years. The storage room door was cracked open maybe 2 inches. Just enough. I approached it slowly. My whole body shaking, but my feet still moving forward like they had a mind of their own. I positioned myself at just the right angle and looked inside. Garrett had his hands tangled in someone's hair. Her back was to me, but I recognized that designer blouse immediately. Simone, Derek's wife. My friend, or the woman I thought was my friend. The woman I'd had lunch with just 3 days ago, where she'd complained about how Derek worked too much and never paid attention to her anymore. They were kissing like teenagers, desperate and hungry. His hands moved up under her blouse. She bit his lower lip and smiled against his mouth. The intimacy of it, the familiarity, made something break inside my chest. This wasn't a first time. This was routine, practiced, comfortable. How long? How many times had they done this while Derek and I sat at dinner tables with them, laughing, toasting to friendship? How many times had I hugged her goodbye while she still had the taste of my husband on her lips? My hand found my phone in my pocket. I pulled it up, opened the camera, hit record. My fingers were trembling, but my mind was suddenly crystal clear. I scrolled to Derek's contact and pressed call. It rang once, twice. His voice came through warm and concerned. He asked if everything was okay. I kept my voice steady, almost detached, and told him I needed him to come to my house right away, that there was an emergency, and I needed his help. He said he'd be there in 10 minutes. I hung up, took one more look at my husband with his hands all over my friend, and then I knocked on that door hard enough to make them jump. Garrett's voice came out panicked, muffled. He called my name like a question, like he couldn't believe I was there. I knocked again, harder this time, and told him to open the door immediately. The scrambling sounds from inside would have been funny if my heart wasn't shattering into 1,000 pieces. Whispers, fabric rustling, something falling and clattering. The door opened a crack and Garrett's face appeared, flushed red, his hair messed up in a way that had nothing to do with surgery. He tried to tell me he was organizing boxes. Organizing boxes at 2 in the afternoon on a day he was supposedly at the hospital performing surgeries. I pushed past him into the storage room. Simone was pressed into the corner, trying to fix her blouse, her lipstick smeared across her chin. They both froze when they saw my face. I wonder what they saw there. Rage, heartbreak, betrayal. I felt all of it burning through me at once. But what I said was cold. So cold I barely recognized my own voice. I told Simone that Derek was on his way, that I'd called him 2 minutes ago and told him there was an emergency at my house, that he'd be here any second now. Her face went completely white. She stammered, asking me what I'd done. Garrett started toward me, but I was already moving backward out of the storage room. I pulled the door shut, turned the old-fashioned key that was always in the lock, and pocketed it. Then I dragged the heavy metal shelving unit that sat next to the door directly in front of it. Garrett started pounding from the inside, shouting my name. Simone was crying, her voice getting higher and more desperate, begging me to open the door, begging me not to let Derek find out. I walked away, climbed the stairs, went to the living room and sat on our white couch, the one Garrett and I had picked out together 5 years ago. And I waited. For the first time in 6 months, my hands stopped shaking. Derek arrived exactly 9 minutes later. I heard his truck pull into the driveway, the engine cutting off, his footsteps hurrying up the front walk. He burst through the door looking terrified, asking what was wrong, if I was hurt. Derek had always been like that, the kind of man who dropped everything when someone needed help. It made what I was about to show him so much worse. I pointed toward the back of the house, toward the muffled shouting that was still coming from the storage room. Garrett had stopped making sense by then, just yelling my name over and over. Simone's voice was hoarse from crying. Derek's face changed. Confusion first, then something darker. He asked me what was happening, but I think he already knew. You can hear it in someone's voice when they're about to have their world destroyed. That edge of knowing before they actually know. I stood up, walked to the storage room, moved the shelf, and unlocked the door. They practically fell out into the hallway. Garrett's shirt was untucked, buttons undone. Simone's mascara had run down her face in black streaks. They looked guilty. They looked caught. They looked exactly like what they were. Derek stood there frozen. He looked at his wife, then at my husband, then at me. His voice when he finally spoke was barely a whisper. He asked how long this had been going on. Garrett tried to say something, some excuse that would make this okay, but Derek cut him off. He repeated the question, louder this time, demanding to know how long. Simone was sobbing, shaking her head like she could make this all disappear if she just refused to answer. But she did answer. Through her tears, she whispered that it had been a year, that it started at the couples retreat in Whistler. The floor tilted under me. Whistler. The retreat I had organized last fall because I thought our marriage needed strengthening. The weekend where I'd dragged Derek and Simone along because I thought it would be fun for all of us to reconnect. I remembered Garrett being so attentive that weekend, so present. I'd thought we were healing. They'd been sleeping together the entire time. Derek didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked out of the house. I followed him, leaving Garrett and Simone in the hallway. We sat in his truck in my driveway, both of us staring straight ahead, trying to process what our lives had just become. He apologized to me. Can you believe that? He apologized like any of this was his fault. I told him I was sorry too, and that at least now we knew the truth. At least now we could stop feeling crazy. We sat there for maybe 20 minutes, not really talking, just existing in that horrible space between the before and after. When I finally went back inside, Garrett was in the living room. Simone had left, probably called an Uber the second she could. Garrett tried to explain. He said it wasn't what it looked like, then realized how stupid that sounded and switched tactics. He said he'd been confused, that I'd been distant, that the marriage had problems. He actually tried to make this my fault. I didn't argue with him. I just told him to get out. He refused at first, said this was his house too, that we needed to talk about this like adults. I picked up my phone and told him I had video of everything I'd seen, that Derek had probably already called a lawyer, and that if he wanted any chance of this divorce not completely destroying him, he should leave now. He left. The next morning, I called Rita Monroe. She was a divorce attorney that one of my gallery clients had used, a woman with a reputation for absolutely decimating cheating spouses. Derek called her too. We compared notes, realized we'd both chosen the same lawyer, and decided to use it to our advantage. Rita could coordinate our cases, use evidence from one to strengthen the other. The discovery process was like excavating a mass grave. Rita's investigators went through everything: bank statements, credit card bills, phone records, emails. What they found made that scene in the storage room look almost innocent. Garrett had opened a credit card in the name of his medical practice, just for the affair. Hotel rooms at the Four Seasons, dinners at restaurants where a single meal cost what most people spent on groceries in a month, weekend trips to Vancouver that lined up perfectly with medical conferences he claimed to attend. Conferences that, when Rita checked, he'd never actually registered for. The total? Almost $70,000 over the course of a year. $70,000 of our money from the practice that I'd helped him build, that I'd supported him through med school for, that came from patients who trusted him. Spent on motels and champagne and lingerie for another man's wife. But the messages were worse than the money. Rita got access to their text history. There were hundreds of them. Thousands, probably. They talked every single day, made plans, shared jokes, complained about us. Garrett called me boring, said I was too focused on my gallery, too independent, that I made him feel unnecessary. Simone said Derek was predictable and safe in a way that made her feel dead inside. They talked about a future together, about leaving us once the timing was right, about how much easier their lives would be once they didn't have to sneak around anymore. They made plans to move to Portland together, to start fresh where no one knew them, and they laughed. They actually laughed about how oblivious Derek and I were. There was one message where Garrett joked about how I'd asked him if everything was okay, and he'd convinced me I was being paranoid. Simone had responded with a laughing emoji. I read every single message Rita printed out, all 463 pages of them. I cried through the first 100 pages. By page 200, I wasn't crying anymore. I was something else. Something harder. Derek and I met at a coffee shop one afternoon, both holding our thick folders of evidence. We sat across from each other and just stared at the papers, like they might rearrange themselves into something less awful if we looked long enough. He asked me if I'd known. If I'd suspected it was this bad. I told him the truth, that I'd known something was wrong, but I'd convinced myself I was overreacting, that I'd let Garrett gaslight me into doubting my own instincts because it was easier than facing this. Derek said he'd felt the same way, that Simone had been withdrawn for months, always on her phone, always busy with book club or yoga or girls' nights that seemed to multiply. He'd thought she was just growing, finding herself. He'd encouraged it because he loved her and wanted her to be happy. We'd both been such fools. Rita scheduled a meeting for the following week. She had a strategy, she said, one that would make sure Garrett and Simone didn't just lose the divorce, they'd lose everything else too. I left that coffee shop with Derek and sat in my car for a long time. I thought about that moment when I'd knocked on the storage room door, how my hands had shaken but my voice had stayed steady, how I'd felt powerful in a way I hadn't felt in years. That power was still there, and I was going to use every bit of it. Rita told me the key to winning wasn't just having evidence, it was knowing when and how to use it. She sat across from Derek and me in her downtown office, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. She had our case files spread across her massive desk like battle plans, because that's what this was. A war. She explained that Garrett and Simone didn't know yet how much we knew. They thought we'd caught them in the act, sure, but they had no idea we had a year's worth of documentation. Hotel receipts, text messages, financial fraud. If we played this right, Rita said, We could let them keep thinking they still had some control, let them make mistakes. So that's exactly what I did. Garrett moved into a hotel downtown but kept texting me. At first, it was apologies, long, rambling messages about how sorry he was, how he never meant to hurt me, how it was just a mistake that got out of hand. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. He started asking about the house, about our finances, about whether we could talk things through like reasonable adults. Rita told me to respond, not with anger, but with careful neutrality. Give him just enough to think I might be willing to negotiate, make him comfortable. So I did. I agreed to meet him for coffee 3 weeks after I'd locked that storage room door. We met at a place in Capitol Hill, somewhere public where he couldn't make a scene. He looked terrible, like he hadn't been sleeping, like guilt was actually eating him alive. Part of me felt satisfied. Most of me felt nothing at all. He ordered us both coffee, the same complicated oat milk latte I used to drink every morning. Like that small gesture could prove he still knew me, still cared. I let him talk first. He went through the whole routine, the apologies, the explanations, the promises that it was over with Simone, that he'd made a huge mistake, that he wanted to fix our marriage. I sipped my coffee and asked him one simple question. Why her? He looked caught off guard, like he'd prepared for anger or tears, but not curiosity. He stumbled through an answer about how it just happened, how they'd gotten close during one of those dinner parties we used to have, how one thing led to another. His words were so vague, so generic, like he was reading from a script. I pressed a little, asked when exactly it started. He said it was recent, maybe 3 or 4 months, said it wasn't serious, just a stupid fling that didn't mean anything. I already knew he was lying. I'd read the messages. I knew it had been a year. I knew they'd used $70,000. I knew they'd planned a whole future together, but I didn't tell him that. I just nodded, told him I needed time to think, asked if we could talk again soon. He looked so relieved, so hopeful, like he actually thought I might forgive him, like he thought he was getting away with something. That's when he made his mistake. As we were leaving, he mentioned something about needing to access our joint savings account to cover some unexpected expenses at the clinic. Medical equipment that needed replacing, staff bonuses that were coming due. He said it so casually, like it was completely normal, like I wouldn't question it. But here's the thing. I'd already frozen our joint accounts the day after I caught them. Rita had advised it immediately. And Garrett's practice had separate business accounts that I had no access to. There was no reason he'd need our personal savings for clinic expenses, unless he was trying to move money before the divorce got ugly. I told him that sounded reasonable, that we could talk about it. He smiled. Actually smiled. Kissed my cheek before he left, and told me he loved me. I sat in that coffee shop for 20 minutes after he walked away, my hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. He'd just tried to rob me, tried to manipulate me into giving him access to our money so he could hide it before our assets got divided. He'd looked me in the eyes, told me he loved me, and tried to steal from me. I called Rita from my car, told her what he'd said. She laughed, this sharp, cold sound that made me like her even more. She said that was exactly the kind of move desperate people make. And now we had one more piece of evidence that Garrett was acting in bad faith. Derek had a similar meeting with Simone around the same time. She'd been calling him nonstop, crying, begging for forgiveness. She told him the affair was over, that she'd made a terrible mistake, that she wanted to work on their marriage. She said she'd do anything to make it right. Derek, following Rita's advice, played along. He met her for lunch, let her cry, let her apologize. And then, just like Garrett, she showed her hand. She suggested they take a trip together, just the two of them. A chance to reconnect, away from all the mess and memories. Maybe Hawaii, maybe Mexico, somewhere they could remember why they fell in love in the first place. It sounded romantic. It sounded like reconciliation. Except Derek and I both knew what it really was. She wanted to get him out of the state while her lawyer tried to establish some kind of abandonment claim or hide assets. Rita had warned us that cheaters often tried to manipulate their spouses into leaving or looking like the unstable ones. Derek told her he'd think about it, kissed her forehead, told her he still cared. He called me that night and we both just sat on the phone in silence for a long time. It's a strange thing, having your life torn apart by the same two people and ending up closer to someone else's spouse than your own. But Derek got it. He understood the specific betrayal of someone looking you in the eyes and lying while pretending to love you. The meetings with our lawyers got more aggressive. Garrett's attorney started making demands: joint custody of future assets, splitting the house 50-50, claiming that I'd been emotionally distant and contributed to the breakdown of the marriage. They were building a narrative where this was somehow mutual fault. Simone's lawyer went after Derek even harder, claimed he'd been controlling, that he'd isolated her from friends, that she'd felt trapped in the marriage. Complete fiction, but they were trying. Rita stayed calm through all of it. She told us to be patient, let them feel confident, let them think their strategies were working. And then one afternoon, she called us both into her office with news that made everything click into place. The investigators had found something new. Garrett's practice was being audited. The medical board had received an anonymous tip about financial irregularities. Specifically, a credit card opened in the clinic's name that was being used for non-medical expenses. The board was now investigating whether Garrett had committed fraud. Rita hadn't made the tip. She swore she hadn't, which meant someone else at Garrett's practice had noticed the suspicious charges and reported him. One of his partners, probably. Someone who didn't want to be associated with his mess. Garrett was about to lose a lot more than his marriage. He was about to lose his medical license. And the best part? He had no idea it was coming. I drove home that evening with the windows down, letting the Seattle rain hit my face. For the first time since this all started, I felt something like hope. Not hope that things would go back to normal. I didn't want normal anymore. Normal was being gaslit and lied to. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth was going to cost them everything. My phone buzzed. A text from Garrett. He wanted to know if I'd thought about what he said at coffee, about giving things another try. I typed back that I was still thinking, that I needed a little more time. I hit send and smiled. Let him think he still had a chance. Let him think he was still in control. In 2 days, Rita was filing our official divorce petitions, and Garrett was going to find out exactly how much he'd underestimated me. Rita filed the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning. Garrett was served at his clinic in front of his partners and the entire office staff. Rita made sure of that. She said public humiliation was part of the strategy. Let everyone in his professional world see exactly what kind of man he was. Let the whispers start before he could control the narrative. He called me 17 times that afternoon. I didn't answer. By the evening, the voicemail shifted from confused to angry to desperate. He couldn't understand why I was doing this, why I wouldn't just talk to him, why I was being so vindictive over one mistake. One mistake. Like a year-long affair was equivalent to forgetting to pick up milk. Derek served Simone the same day. She was at their house, the house that was about to become just his house, when the process server showed up. Derek had moved into a hotel weeks ago, taking their 2 kids with him. Simone had been living alone in that big house, probably thinking she still had time to fix things. She didn't. The custody petition hit her hardest. Derek was asking for full custody of their daughter and son. Rita had built an airtight case. Simone had been leaving the kids with babysitters and had after-school programs for extended hours, not because she was working, but because she was meeting Garrett. There were text messages where she complained about how the kids were cramping her style, how she couldn't wait until they were old enough to be more independent. What kind of mother says that about her own children? Derek's kids were 8 and 10, old enough to notice when their mom was checked out, old enough to feel the absence. Rita had even included statements from the babysitters about how many extra hours they'd been called in over the past year, how Simone would sometimes not come home until late at night, smelling like wine and expensive cologne. The judge wasn't going to like that. Rita made sure of it. But the real ammunition came from what the investigators had continued digging up. Because while Garrett and Simone thought their affair was this grand romance, the truth was so much uglier than either of them wanted to admit. They weren't even each other's first affair. Rita's team found evidence that Garrett had cheated before, 5 years ago, with a pharmaceutical rep who used to visit his clinic. It lasted about 6 months before she moved to a different territory. There were hotel receipts, dinner charges, the same pattern as with Simone. I'd never known. He'd hidden it completely. And Simone? She'd had an emotional affair with her personal trainer 2 years before Garrett. It hadn't gone physical, or at least she'd claimed it hadn't in the messages Rita found, but she'd been planning to leave Derek for him. The trainer had ended things when he found out she was married. These weren't people who made one mistake in otherwise faithful marriages. These were people who kept choosing betrayal, who kept choosing themselves over everyone else, who kept destroying the people who loved them because they could. Understanding that changed something in me. I'd spent weeks wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have done differently to keep Garrett faithful. But this wasn't about me. It had never been about me. Garrett was always going to cheat because that's who he was. Simone was always going to blow up her family because she valued excitement over stability. Some people are just broken in ways that hurt everyone around them. Rita scheduled a mediation meeting for 3 weeks out. It was technically optional, but both Garrett's and Simone's lawyers agreed to it, probably thinking they could negotiate better terms than a judge would give. They thought they could still minimize the damage. They had no idea what was waiting for them. In the meantime, I focused on the one thing I could control, my own future. I'd been so consumed by the divorce, by the betrayal, by the anger, that I'd let my gallery slip. My assistant had been holding things together, but barely. I'd missed openings, ignored artist inquiries, let relationships with collectors go cold. I spent a week diving back into work, reconnecting with artists, planning new exhibitions, remembering why I'd opened the gallery in the first place, because I loved art, loved finding new talent, loved creating spaces where people could experience something beautiful and true. Garrett had always been dismissive of my work, called it a hobby, suggested I close it down and focus on supporting his career instead. I'd brushed it off at the time, told myself he didn't mean it like that, but now I could see it clearly. He'd wanted me smaller, wanted me dependent, wanted me to need him, so I'd never question him. The gallery had always been my proof that I didn't need anyone, that I could build something meaningful on my own, and I wasn't going to let his betrayal destroy that. One afternoon, I was at the gallery installing a new piece when Derek stopped by. He brought coffee, good coffee this time, from that place we'd both discovered near Rita's office. We sat on the floor of the empty gallery space, surrounded by unfinished installations and packing materials. He told me about his kids, how his daughter had asked why Mommy didn't live with them anymore, how his son had gotten in a fight at school defending his mom when another kid said something about the divorce. Derek had tried to explain things in age-appropriate ways, but how do you tell your children that their mother chose an affair over them without making them feel like they weren't enough? I didn't have answers. I just listened. He asked me if I thought we'd ever trust anyone again. If we'd ever be able to look at someone and not wonder what they were hiding. I told him honestly that I didn't know. That maybe we wouldn't. That maybe that was okay. Maybe being cautious wasn't the same as being broken. We sat there until the sun started setting, painting the gallery walls orange and gold. And for just a moment, it felt peaceful. Like maybe on the other side of all this mess, there was something quiet and good waiting. But first, we had to finish what we started. Rita called that evening with the final piece of the puzzle. The medical board had completed their preliminary investigation of Garrett's practice. They'd found exactly what she'd hoped they'd find: the fraudulent credit card, the misappropriation of clinic funds, the pattern of using practice resources for personal gain. Garrett was being formally reprimanded. His partners were forcing him to sell his stake in the clinic, and there was talk of a temporary suspension of his license pending a full ethics review. His career, the thing he'd valued above everything, above me, above honesty, above decency, was crumbling, and it was entirely his own doing. Rita had also discovered something about Simone. She'd been secretly applying for jobs in Portland, the same city she and Garrett had talked about moving to in their messages. She'd been planning her exit for months, lining up interviews, building a new life while still living in Derek's house, still using his money, still pretending to be his wife. The mediation meeting was in 2 days. Rita told us to dress well, look calm, and let her do the talking. She had prepared a presentation, a comprehensive breakdown of every lie, every manipulation, every dollar stolen, every message sent. She was going to lay it all out in front of their lawyers and give them one chance to settle on our terms. If they refused, she was going to court, and she was going to bury them. I hung up and looked around my house, the house I'd picked out, decorated, filled with memories that now felt like lies. Soon, it would just be mine. No more Garrett, no more pretending, just me and the life I was going to build from the ruins of the old one. I thought about that moment in the storage room, how I'd felt powerful turning that key, I felt that same power now, but stronger, more certain. They'd thought they could take everything from me, my marriage, my dignity, my sense of reality. But the only thing they'd actually taken was their own futures. And I was about to make sure they knew it. The mediation was held in a conference room that felt like a courtroom without the judge. Rita had coached Derek and me beforehand. Sit straight, stay calm, don't react no matter what they say. Let them see that we weren't broken, weren't desperate, weren't willing to negotiate away what we deserved just to make this end faster. Garrett arrived first with his lawyer, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who looked like he charged by the word. Garrett wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the table, on his phone, anywhere but my face. Good. I hoped guilt was eating him alive. Simone came in 10 minutes later with her attorney, a woman with sharp features and sharper heels. Simone's eyes were red, makeup caked on to hide the evidence of crying. She glanced at Derek once, then away quickly when she saw his expression. He looked at her like she was a stranger, like the woman he'd married had died and been replaced by someone he didn't recognize. Maybe that's exactly what had happened. Rita started the meeting with a presentation. She had a laptop connected to a screen, and she pulled up slide after slide of evidence. Bank statements showing the fraudulent credit card charges, hotel receipts from the Four Seasons, the Fairmont, boutique places in Vancouver, romantic dinners that cost more than most people's rent, weekend getaways disguised as medical conferences. Garrett's lawyer tried to interrupt, claiming this was inappropriate for mediation, that we should be focused on coming to an agreement rather than litigating past behavior. Rita smiled, that cold, sharp smile I'd come to recognize, and told him that understanding the full scope of the marital misconduct was essential to reaching a fair settlement. She kept going. Text messages appeared on the screen. Not all of them. That would have taken hours, but carefully selected excerpts. Garrett calling me boring and controlling. Simone laughing about how oblivious Derek was. Their discussions about a future together in Portland. Plans to leave us once the timing was right. Simone started crying. Garrett finally looked up at the screen, his face going pale. Their lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Rita wasn't done. She pulled up Garrett's previous affair. The pharmaceutical rep from 5 years ago. More receipts, more messages, evidence that this wasn't a one-time mistake but a pattern of behavior. His lawyer objected again, saying that had nothing to do with the current divorce. Rita calmly explained that it established a history of infidelity and deception, which was relevant to the division of assets and any claims of good faith. Then she showed Simone's job applications to Portland, proof that she'd been planning to abandon her family, that the affair wasn't just about passion, but about escape. That she'd been building an exit strategy while still living in Derek's house, still spending Derek's money, still pretending to be a wife and mother. The room was silent, except for Simone's quiet crying. Rita finally stopped the presentation and laid out our terms. They were brutal, but fair. More than fair, considering what Garrett and Simone had done. I would keep the house. Garrett would buy out my share of his clinic stake, whatever was left of it after his partners forced the sale. He'd pay me spousal support for 5 years to compensate for the career sacrifices I'd made, supporting him through med school and his early practice years. And he'd reimburse me for half of the $70,000 he'd spent on the affair. Derek's terms for Simone were even harsher. Full custody of the kids with supervised visitation for her until she could prove stability. She'd keep her car and personal belongings, but nothing else. No claim to the house, no spousal support, nothing. And she'd be responsible for her own legal fees. Garrett's lawyer immediately pushed back, said we were being unreasonable, that no judge would award such one-sided settlements. Rita pulled out another file, this one containing the medical board's report on Garrett's ethics violation. She slid it across the table. She explained that if this went to court, she'd be calling his partners as witnesses. She'd be subpoenaing all the clinic's financial records. She'd be making sure every detail of his fraud became public record. His reputation, what was left of it, would be completely destroyed. Or he could agree to our terms, and we could all move on with our lives quietly. Garrett's face had gone from pale to gray. His lawyer asked for a recess to discuss with his client. Rita agreed. They stepped out into the hallway. Simone's lawyer tried a different approach. She started with sympathy, saying that Simone had made mistakes but didn't deserve to lose her children, that the kids needed their mother. Derek finally spoke then, his voice low and controlled. He said the kids needed a mother who chose them, a mother who didn't leave them with babysitters so she could sleep with someone else's husband, A mother who didn't complain about them being inconvenient to her affair. Simone broke down completely, sobbed that she was sorry, that she loved her kids, that she'd been confused and made terrible choices. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, asked for a recess as well. Rita, Derek, and I sat alone in that conference room for 20 minutes. None of us spoke. We didn't need to. We could hear muffled arguing from the hallway, Garrett's voice getting louder, his lawyer trying to calm him down. Simone's crying hadn't stopped. When they came back, they'd both aged about 10 years. Garrett's lawyer said they'd agree to the terms with one modification. The spousal support would be 4 years instead of 5. Rita looked at me. I nodded. 1 year didn't matter. What mattered was that he was agreeing, that he was admitting defeat. Simone's lawyer tried to negotiate the custody arrangement, asking for unsupervised visitation on weekends. Derek refused. Supervised only, at least for the first 6 months. After that, they could revisit it based on how things were going. Simone looked at Derek, desperate, pleading. He looked right through her. They agreed. The paperwork took another 2 hours. Lawyers drafting settlement agreements, typing up custody arrangements, calculating exact financial terms. Garrett signed without looking at me once. Simone signed with shaking hands, tears dripping onto the pages. When it was done, when every signature was in place, Rita stood and shook hands with their lawyers. Professional courtesy. Like we'd just closed a business deal instead of dismantling 2 marriages and destroying the lives of 2 people who thought they were untouchable. We walked out of that building into the gray Seattle afternoon. Derek and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, both of us feeling the weight lift. It wasn't over yet. The divorces still had to be finalized by a judge, which would take weeks. But the hard part was done. The fighting was over. Derek turned to me and said something I'll never forget. He said that he'd spent the past few weeks angry, hurt, wanting revenge. But sitting in that room watching Simone fall apart, watching Garrett sign away his future, he just felt sad. Sad for what could have been. Sad that they'd destroyed something that could have been beautiful if they'd just been honest. Sad that their kids would grow up with this story. I understood. I felt it too. Underneath all the anger and betrayal, there was just this deep sadness for the life I'd thought I had, for the man I'd thought Garrett was, for the version of me that used to trust completely and love without guards. But that version of me was gone. And maybe that was okay. Maybe the woman I was becoming, harder, wiser, less willing to accept lies, maybe she was better, stronger. Rita took us out for drinks that night, a small celebration at a bar near her office. She told us stories about other cases, other cheaters, other people who thought they'd never get caught. She'd been doing this for 15 years, she said, and the one thing that never changed was how surprised people were when their lies finally caught up to them. I asked her if it ever got easier, watching marriages end. She took a long sip of her wine and said no. That every divorce was someone's tragedy, even when they deserved it. But helping good people get justice, that part never got old. We toasted to justice, to truth, to new beginnings. I went home to my house now, legally, finally, and walked through each room. It felt different already, less like a crime scene, more like a blank canvas. I could redecorate, change everything, make it mine in ways it had never been before. My phone buzzed, a text from Derek, just 3 words. We did it, I texted back. We survived, because that's what this was, survival. And survival, I was learning, was its own kind of victory. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. A formality, really, since we'd already settled everything. The judge would review the agreements, make sure everything was legal and fair, and sign off. Then it would be officially over. But something happened 2 days before that hearing that changed everything. Something that made me realize that Garrett and Simone's punishment was only just beginning. And it had nothing to do with me. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I'd been getting random calls for weeks. Journalists who'd somehow heard about the case, old friends who wanted to gossip, even a few people claiming to be Garrett's patients asking if the rumors were true. I'd stopped picking up for anyone not in my contacts. But something made me answer this one. Maybe intuition, maybe fate. The voice on the other end was female, professional, nervous. She introduced herself as Dr. Melissa Chen, one of Garrett's partners at the clinic. We'd met a few times at practice events, but I wouldn't have called us friends. She asked if we could meet for coffee, said it was important, said it was about Garrett. I met her an hour later at a cafe in Fremont. Melissa looked exhausted. She ordered a double espresso and sat across from me, her hands wrapped around the cup like she needed the warmth. She apologized for reaching out, said she knew this was probably the last thing I wanted to deal with. But there was something I needed to know, something that was about to become very public. The medical board investigation had expanded. What started as a probe into the fraudulent credit card had uncovered something much bigger. Garrett had been altering patient records, billing insurance companies for procedures he hadn't performed, or inflating the complexity of routine surgeries to get higher reimbursements. Fraud on a massive scale. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about our marriage anymore. This was criminal. Melissa explained that she and the other partners had hired a forensic accountant when the board first started asking questions. They'd wanted to understand the full scope of the problem before it destroyed the practice. What they found was years of systematic fraud. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. The clinic was being sued by multiple insurance companies. Federal investigators were involved. Garrett was going to be arrested. I sat there trying to process what she was telling me. The affair, the lies, the stolen money, all of that had been devastating. But this was evil. He'd been stealing from insurance companies, which meant he'd been stealing from patients, from the healthcare system, from everyone. People who'd trusted him with their health, their bodies, their lives. Melissa said the partners wanted me to know before it hit the news, that they felt responsible somehow, like they should have caught it sooner. She looked genuinely distressed, like she was carrying guilt that wasn't hers to carry. I thanked her for telling me, asked when the arrest would happen. She said soon, maybe days. The federal prosecutors were still building their case, but it was coming. I called Derek as soon as I left the cafe. Told him everything. He was quiet for a long time, then said something that made my blood run cold. He said Simone had been visiting Garrett. That despite everything, despite the divorce, despite losing custody of her kids, she'd been going to his hotel, trying to make it work. They were still together, still choosing each other even after they'd destroyed everything. And now Simone was about to be tied to a federal fraud case. Even if she had nothing to do with it, the association alone would destroy what little reputation she had left. The news broke 2 days before our final divorce hearing. I woke up to text messages from friends, notifications from news apps, emails from reporters. The headlines were everywhere. Prominent Seattle surgeon arrested for healthcare fraud. Doctor accused of billing scam. Medical practice under federal investigation. Garrett's mugshot was on every local news site. He looked broken, defeated. Nothing like the confident surgeon who used to come home and tell me about the lives he'd saved. The story detailed everything. The fraudulent billing going back at least 5 years. The estimated amount, over $400,000. The potential prison sentence, up to 20 years if convicted. His medical license had been suspended indefinitely. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. I turned it off, sat in my house in silence, trying to understand how I'd spent 10 years married to a man I didn't know at all. Rita called from her office line, the only number I was still answering. She'd seen the news, asked how I was doing. I told her honestly, I didn't know. Part of me felt vindicated, like the universe was delivering justice I couldn't have orchestrated myself. Part of me just felt sick. She said the divorce hearing might be delayed while the criminal case played out, but probably not. Family court and criminal court were separate systems. We could still finalize the divorce on schedule. I asked her if this changed anything about the settlement. She said no. The agreement was signed. Even if Garrett went to prison, he owed me what we'd negotiated. The court would garnish whatever assets he had left, which probably wouldn't be much. The clinic was dissolving. His partners were already distancing themselves, putting out statements about how shocked and betrayed they felt. His lawyer fees for the criminal case alone would drain whatever savings he had. The life he'd built, the reputation, the money, the respect, all of it was gone. And Simone was right there beside him, watching it all burn. Derek told me later that she'd released a statement through her lawyer. Said she'd had no knowledge of Garrett's illegal activities, that she was cooperating fully with investigators, that she'd been a victim of his manipulation just like everyone else. The audacity of it. playing victim when she'd helped destroy 2 families, when she'd abandoned her own children for a man who turned out to be a criminal. The media wasn't buying it. They'd connected the affair to the fraud timeline. Reporters were speculating that the affair had started because Garrett needed someone who wouldn't question his expensive lifestyle, wouldn't notice the suspicious patterns. Simone had been his accomplice whether she knew it or not, spending his stolen money on hotel rooms and trips, helping him hide it from me. The divorce hearing finally happened on a Friday morning. Garrett didn't show up. His lawyer appeared and explained that his client was dealing with the criminal proceedings and had authorized him to finalize the divorce in his absence. The judge didn't look pleased but accepted it. Simone was there for Derek's hearing right after mine. She looked terrible, hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside her and left just the shell. She kept glancing at Derek, waiting for him to look back. He never did. The judge reviewed both settlements, asked if we understood the terms, confirmed we were entering into them willingly. Rita answered for me. Said yes, we understood. Yes, this was what we wanted. The judge signed the papers, said the divorces were granted, wished us both luck. And just like that, it was over. 10 years of marriage dissolved in a 15-minute hearing. I walked out of that courthouse a single woman, free, untethered, terrified and relieved in equal measure. Derek was waiting outside. We stood on the courthouse steps in the October rain, both of us holding our divorce decrees like diplomas from the worst school imaginable. He said he'd been thinking about what happens next, about how to move forward when everything behind you was ashes. He'd been talking to a therapist, someone who specialized in betrayal trauma. She'd told him that healing wasn't about forgetting or forgiving. It was about deciding what story you wanted to tell about yourself going forward. I liked that. The idea that we got to write the next chapter ourselves. We got coffee. Our ritual now. This thing we did when the world felt too heavy. Sat in a window booth and watched Seattle blur past. Derek talked about his kids, about how they were adjusting. His daughter had started therapy too. His son was acting out less at school. They were healing, slowly, but healing. I told him about my plans for the gallery. I'd decided to expand, to take over the space next door and create a larger exhibition area. I was done playing small, done letting other people's opinions dictate what I built. Derek smiled, said that was the first time he'd seen me look genuinely excited about anything in months. He was right. Somewhere in the middle of all this destruction, I'd found something that felt like hope. My phone buzzed. A news alert. Garrett had been formally indicted by a federal grand jury. Trial date set for 6 months out. If convicted, he'd face a minimum of 10 years in prison. I showed Derek the notification. He read it and shook his head, said he almost felt sorry for Garrett. Almost. But then he remembered the lies, the manipulation, the way Garrett had looked at us like we were stupid for trusting him. He didn't feel sorry anymore. Neither did I. We sat there until the coffee got cold, talking about everything and nothing, about our plans, our fears, the weird, unexpected friendship that had formed in the wreckage of our marriages, about how sometimes the worst things that happen to you crack you open in ways that let the light in. When we finally left, Derek hugged me, said he was glad I'd locked that storage room door, that if I hadn't, we might have gone on for years not knowing, being lied to, slowly dying inside while they laughed at us. I hugged him back, told him we survived, and that had to count for something. I drove home, to my house, my space, my future, and felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Peace. Not happiness. Not yet. But peace. The quiet that comes after a storm when you realize you're still standing, still breathing, still here. And that was enough. For now, that was more than enough. 2 years later, I barely recognize the woman I used to be. I'm standing in my gallery, my expanded gallery, watching people move through the space I created. There's an opening tonight for a young artist from Tacoma whose work explores themes of rebirth and transformation. The paintings are raw, honest, painful, in the way that real art should be. They remind me of where I've been. But I'm not there anymore. The house in Queen Anne sold 6 months after the divorce finalized. I couldn't stay there. Too many ghosts. Too many memories of a life that turned out to be fiction. I bought a loft in Pioneer Square instead. All exposed brick and massive windows, light pouring in from every direction. I decorated it myself. Every piece, every color choice, every decision mine alone. It feels like home in a way that house never did. The gallery is thriving. Turns out when you stop making yourself smaller to accommodate someone else's ego, you can actually build something remarkable. I've featured 15 new artists in the past year, sold pieces to collectors in New York, Los Angeles, even Tokyo. The revenue last quarter was triple what it was when I was married. Garrett would have called it luck. I call it what happens when you finally bet on yourself. Derek stops by the gallery sometimes. His kids are with him today. His daughter is 13 now, his son 11. They've grown so much, healed so much. His daughter wants to be an artist, actually asked if she could intern at the gallery next summer. I told her absolutely. Derek met someone about 8 months ago, a teacher named Caroline who has this quiet kindness about her. She's good with his kids, doesn't push, doesn't try to replace their mother, just shows up consistently, honestly. The kids love her. Derek lights up when he talks about her in a way I never saw with Simone. He asked me a few weeks ago if I thought he was moving too fast, if it was too soon. I told him there's no timeline for healing, that he deserved to be happy, that choosing joy after trauma isn't betraying what you went through. It's honoring it. I think he believed me. As for Simone, she disappeared. Not literally, but effectively. After the divorce, after losing custody, after Garrett's arrest made headlines and dragged her name through every Seattle news outlet, she left. Moved to Portland like she'd always planned, except alone this time. No Garrett, no kids, no grand romance. Derek's kids see her once a month for supervised visits. They're cordial, but distant. They haven't forgiven her. Maybe they never will. That's their right. I heard through mutual friends that she's working at a nonprofit now. Something with homeless youth. Maybe she's trying to build something meaningful from the wreckage. Maybe she's just trying to survive. Either way, it's not my story to worry about anymore. And Garrett. Garrett took a plea deal. The federal prosecutors had him dead to rights with the fraud charges. The evidence was overwhelming. He pled guilty to healthcare fraud and insurance fraud, got sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. He's currently serving his time at a facility in Oregon. His medical license is permanently revoked. Even after he gets out, he'll never practice medicine again. The career he built, the reputation he valued more than his marriage, more than honesty, more than basic human decency, gone. He wrote me a letter about 6 months ago. The prison forwarded it to my lawyer's office. Rita called to ask if I wanted it. I said no at first. Then I changed my mind. The letter was 12 pages long, handwritten, rambling. He apologized for everything. The affair, the lies, the fraud, the way he'd treated me. He said prison had given him time to think about who he'd become, about the choices he'd made. He said he understood now that he'd destroyed the best thing in his life because he was too broken to appreciate it. He said he hoped someday I could forgive him. I read the letter once, then I burned it in my fireplace and never thought about it again. Because here's what I learned through all of this. Forgiveness isn't something you owe people who hurt you. It's not a box you have to check to prove you've healed. Some betrayals are too deep, too intentional, too cruel to forgive. And that's okay. I don't forgive Garrett. I probably never will. But I also don't hate him anymore. I don't think about him at all most days. He's become irrelevant to my life in a way that feels like its own kind of freedom. What I did instead of forgiving was something better. I rebuilt. I took everything they tried to destroy, and I made it stronger. I turned the gallery into something extraordinary. I developed friendships that are built on honesty instead of performance. I learned to trust my instincts instead of doubting them. I proved to myself that I didn't need a husband or a perfect marriage to be whole. I was always whole. I just forgot for a while. The opening tonight is packed. People are drinking wine, discussing art, laughing. I move through the crowd feeling proud, feeling present, feeling like myself in a way I haven't since I was in my 20s. Before Garrett, before I learned to make myself smaller, someone asks me how I built such a successful gallery. I almost tell them the real story, that it took my husband cheating with my friend and getting arrested for federal crimes to finally give me the courage to actually try. But I don't. I just smile and say I stopped being afraid of taking up space. It's the truth, even if it's not the whole truth. Derek finds me near the end of the night. The kids are tired, ready to go home. His daughter hugs me goodbye, tells me she can't wait for summer when she can work here. His son, quieter, more reserved, tells me the paintings are cool. From an 11-year-old boy, that's high praise. Derek lingers after they head to the car. He thanks me for tonight, for always making space for his family. I tell him he's family now too, that we survived something together that bonded us in ways normal friendship doesn't. He nods, understands. Then he says something that makes my chest tight. He says that day I locked the storage room door was the worst day of his life, but it was also the day his real life started. The honest one, the one where he stopped living in someone else's lie. I feel the exact same way. After everyone leaves, I stand alone in the gallery. The city lights of Seattle glow through the windows. Somewhere out there, Garrett is in a prison cell. Simone is in Portland trying to rebuild from nothing. Their story ended with loss and regret and consequences they'll carry forever. But my story is just beginning. I think about that woman I was 2 years ago. The one who doubted herself, who accepted gaslighting as love, who made herself small to keep a marriage that was already dead. I wish I could go back and tell her that everything she's about to go through will crack her open in the worst and best ways possible. That locking that door wasn't impulsive or crazy, it was the bravest thing she'd ever do. That on the other side of betrayal is a version of herself she's going to love more than she ever loved him. But I can't go back. None of us can. We can only move forward. Choose ourselves. Build something real from the ashes. So that's what I did. That's what I'm still doing. And you know what? I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm thriving. If you've made it this far with me through this whole messy, painful, ultimately beautiful story, thank you. Really. Sometimes we need witnesses to our transformation. People who see where we've been and celebrate where we're going. Drop a comment and let me know what city you're hearing this from. I love knowing that stories like mine, stories about falling apart and putting yourself back together, reach people everywhere. And if you want to follow along with more stories of survival and strength, make sure you're subscribed here. Because there are so many of us out here rebuilding. So many of us choosing ourselves. So many of us learning that the worst thing that ever happened to us doesn't get to be the end of our story. It's just the beginning of a better one.